Hi, Mr. Norton. We've got our fourth video in our lecture series on the Reformation, as far as that unit goes. We're pretty much done with Luther. We wrapped that up in lesson 3, lecture 3, and now we're going to focus more on a lot more of the military and violence aspect of the Reformation. So the things we're going to be focusing on today is going to be conflict within Germany. We know that Charles V is the Holy Roman Emperor. Basically, he rules over all the lands of the Holy Roman Empire, with exceptions because there are local rulers. And then we also have wars that break out inside of France. And so those are going to be the things that we focus on as far as today is concerned. First thing we need to know, let's get some recap here. We've got Charles V. He's the Holy Roman Empire, as I said earlier. He wants to make sure that his kingdom is united under Catholicism. Some recap too is that you should be aware that Charles V is also the ruler of Spain. He was able to do that through dynastic marriages. Now, there are 4 obstacles that are going to be problems for him in terms of his quest to try and unify everyone under Catholicism. That's going to be the French, the Pope, the Ottomans, and Germany. I know what you might be thinking. The Pope is Catholic, so why would the Pope stand in his way as far as trying to unite them under Catholicism? We will get to that very, very shortly. But let's start off with the French. So as you can see here with a map, so we've got the French flag of that time in the upper right. We have a map in the lower right. So basically you can see that France is surrounded as far as the Holy Roman Empire and Charles V is concerned, because he basically controls the territory to the southwest of France, and then basically surrounds the eastern borders as far as France is concerned. So France basically, I guess you would say they're pretty paranoid. And when you have so much territory that is right up against each other, there's going to be a likelihood of some sort of dispute come about. And that's basically what happened, is you have a bunch of conflicts over disputed land. And we're going to refer to those as the Habsburg-Valois Wars. There's a number of them. I want to say it takes place around 25 years worth. But that's going to be one of the things that are major obstacles for Charles V. You'll see a recurring theme. It's like every time Charles tries to focus on eradicating Lutheranism, something new pops up to take his focus away. So we also have the Pope. You know, obviously the Pope is Catholic, duh, right? You would think that he would support Charles in his attempt to try and get rid of Lutheranism, because as we'll learn in later lessons, is that the Catholic Church had their own problems in trying to get rid of Lutheranism. But what ends up happening, as we've learned, much like in the past lessons, the Pope tries to play with politics and is more interested in that than actually the religious and spiritual aspect of things, and they end up siding with the French in the Habsburg-Valois Wars. And what ends up happening, too, is that basically Charles V takes his army down and just smacks the Pope around as far as his territories are concerned. Keep in mind, remember, Charles V also controls much of Italy, too, because Italy is split up between France and the Holy Roman Emperor. Those things will change, obviously, with Charles V later, as you'll get to see. So basically what we end up seeing here as a turning point, too, is because the Pope really doesn't get involved in politics after this point. Yeah, we don't even really talk about the Pope too much after this lesson. He comes up here and there, but not so much. You know, we'll see a little bit in the scientific revolution, but you know, as far as politics are concerned, really not a factor here. We have the Ottoman Empire, which is extending in from Asia, and as you can see on the map here, the Ottoman Empire is basically going to be trying to enter Europe through some areas that are not very familiar, are controlled by the Holy Roman Empire. Now, they don't have Hungary and Bohemia, but that is a concern for them, okay? So basically, that's another thing that happens, is like if Charles V isn't dealing with the French, the Habsburg-Valois Wars, he's then having to deal with the Ottomans, and it's just a constant problem for him. Again, he never ends up being able to focus on eradicating Lutheranism because of this factor. Okay, politics in Germany become an issue too, so let's kind of go with this. So around 1530, Charles V basically makes this decision referred to as the Diet of Augsburg, which basically commands all of the German people who ever went to Lutheranism to convert back. And of course, they're like, yeah, whatever, buddy, we're not really going to do that. Some other things too, though, is that the local rulers, remember, all these little different territories have their own ruler. Now they're supposed to have allegiance and loyalty to the emperor, but they're also kind of scared and maybe not scared is the word, but they're kind of cautious because they don't want to see the emperor start gaining power and being more like what we're seeing in Western Europe, like with France and England, and well, I mean the early kings of Spain, because before Charles V you had Ferdinand and Isabella. Okay, so what they end up doing, these territories that are Lutheran, is they create the Schmalkaldic League. Of course, try and say that really fast, Schmalkaldic League. I don't even know if I'm saying it correctly. Every year it's an absolute butchering of the name, but anyways. So basically, this is a uniting of all the Lutheran territories and followers of the Holy Roman Empire. And one of the things that helps out them is that basically the Ottomans try and invade, which you just referred to earlier, from 1532 to 1535. And essentially, Charles is forced to negotiate a peace deal and leave them alone. So once again, his hopes of crushing Lutheranism are put on hold. We've got some more Habsburg-Valois wars resuming, 2 different rounds between 1535 and 1538, as well as 1542 and 1544. So once again, we have another case where Charles V has his attention stretched to something else. So basically what ends up happening now is around 1546, Luther is dead. The Habsburg-Valois wars are over for now. You don't have to deal with the Ottoman Empire anymore. And so what ends up happening is the Schmalkaldic Wars. And it goes very well for Charles early on. He basically smashes them, but they're not done. They end up reorganizing, and they get some help from a very familiar adversary of Charles V. And it's funny because if the French were so worried about having everyone be Catholic, which you'll see later in the French Wars of Religion, you would think that they would not help the Lutherans, but they end up doing that. That's who the Schmalkaldic League forms an alliance with, and basically Charles V cannot handle fighting both of these forces combined. Basically, he's forced to make peace, and he abdicates the throne. If you don't know what that basically means he just gives it up. He gives up his title, and he ends up going off into Spain and basically retires and tries to live a peaceful life until, obviously it's over with. Eventually we have an agreement called the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, and that's going to make some changes as far as the Holy Roman Empire goes in terms of worship and religion. Specifically, we're talking about this. Lutheranism, this is the big winner for the Lutherans. Lutheranism is now an accepted practicing religion inside of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, the way that it works, though, is it's not freedom for everybody to make their decisions. It's the rulers of each of the territories that will be able to make the decision as to which religion it is that your territory will follow. So if you're a Catholic and you're living inside of a territory in which the ruler has determined Lutheranism will be the religion that's going to be followed, technically you're not supposed to be able to make that decision for yourselves. One of the things I want to make sure that we're aware of, too, is that Calvinism, which is a growing religion around this time, is also not addressed in this particular peace agreement. This will become an issue in one of our lessons that we cover later. We're going to see more warfare and bloodshed break out over the acceptance of Calvinism. Okay, so this is going to bring us to the French Wars of Religion. Okay, basically it's a series of civil wars fueled by religion. You have two groups here that we're mainly focusing on: the Calvinists, which we're going to refer to as the Huguenots, and the Catholics. Now, some of the things that you need to know for background is about 50% of the nobles are Calvinists, and this includes the Bourbon family, which we're going to focus on Henry of Navarre. I often refer to him as Captain Flip-Flop because you'll see how he flip-flops his religions very soon. Now, as far as the actual kingdom, it shouldn't be any surprise. The Valois family is the one who rules, as evident by the Habsburg-Valois wars that we referenced earlier. And they are staunch Catholics, so they're going to be, they're not going to be very religiously tolerant, I should say. So let's talk about what happens with the ruler. King Henry ends up dying in an accident. According to the story, he was in a tournament, probably like a jousting tournament, and something went wrong. He's dead. He basically leaves his kingdom to his kids. The problem is that they're too young to take over at the time of his death. And so the mother, who is Queen Catherine de Medici, acts as the regent. And she's trying to be partial. She's trying to basically come to a solution to bring the two sides together. The problem is that she notices that each side has their extremists, I don't want to call them like crazy folks, but basically people who are just kind of over the top as far as their cause is concerned. So we have some groups that we refer to as the ultra-Catholics. They're like, being Catholic isn't good enough. You have to be an ultra-Catholic. They have strict opposition to the Huguenots, and those are led by the Guy family. Another thing we should notice about the Guy family is that they are extremely rich and powerful. They have the influence of the Pope behind them, and they have the help of the Jesuits, which is a Christian group, a Catholic group that was created for the purpose of furthering Catholicism, but we haven't necessarily covered that with the pattern we're taking in my class. Perhaps if you're watching this from another class, you'll know who the Jesuits are at this time. Okay. So some other views too, towns, they're kind of uneasy about the growing power of the monarchy. Remember, since we were talking about new monarchies in our Renaissance chapter, it's this gradual accumulation of power to the kings, and it makes people uneasy. And of course, it's going to make the nobles uneasy too, because they're the ones that are having their power taken from them. And some of the provinces that France controls as well is going to be not so happy about this movement. Politiques is another group that basically says fighting about religion is stupid. We need to put politics first. You shouldn't have any disagreements over religion. It's basically like, let's do what's best for the state. We're going to call Henry Navarre a politique, at least in my opinion, because he's constantly putting, well, in some cases his life, but he puts religion on the back burner, especially at the end, to try and make sure that France is able to unify. Let's talk about the struggle. Basically, the two-side struggle. We have the Civil War that starts off with the Duke of Guy is going to massacre a bunch of Huguenots at the French town of Vassy. I may have said that improperly, but well. Catholics can't make much progress, though, because the Huguenots are very good at fighting defensive war. So they can't really get into the towns. They're pretty much just kind of at a standstill. There is an attempt to try and unify the two sides, and this is going to be done through marriage. You have Catherine de' Medici, who's going to try and marry off her daughter, who is obviously going to be the sister of the king that's getting ready to come about. And she's going to be married to the leader of the Huguenots political faction, well, the political leader of the Huguenots, which would be Henry of Navarre. What ends up happening, though, is everybody comes to Paris for this wedding, and basically the Duke of Guy convinces Catherine to go ahead and green light a murdering of all these Huguenot officials, these high-ranking people. And the reason he says is like, hey, you know what? Civil war is going to come about anyways. We're not going to be able to stop it. Why don't we just go ahead and take advantage of this right now, strike while we can, get the advantage, and we'll go ahead and basically try and put this thing to bed early. She agrees, obviously, and what ends up happening is like a 3-day killing spree in which Catholics roam the streets looking for Huguenots and just murdering and butchering anyone, especially in the leadership position. There's a story in our textbook talking about a woman who gets dragged out in the street, and they're trying to take her gold bracelets off, and they're like, you know what, I'm not even going to try and take them off. They just cut her hands off and then take her bracelets off from there. It's really nasty. I mean, basically, look at what's in the picture that's on the screen now. That is a artist's rendition of what that is, and you can see people just blood everywhere, just mass killing. It's kind of like, it's almost like the Purge, right? Maybe not. All right. Other thing too is there are organized killings, not in Paris, but they actually carry them out in other areas too. Now, this is going to transition into a time period we refer to as the War of the Three Henries. The Huguenots, despite this massive setback, once again, are not actually destroyed. They're able to reorganize and regroup. We end up having something called the Catholic League, which is created, and basically they're an organization, and they have two goals. I'm sure you can guess what the organization is about, right? The Catholic League. They want to destroy all the Calvinists that are within France, and they also want to put Henry of Guy on the throne. So again, this is the Guy family trying to gain some more power for themselves. Now, the Guy family is able to have some success because we have Philip II, who's the King of Spain. I know we haven't mentioned anything about him to this point, but one thing you should be familiar with is Philip II is actually the son of Charles V, so it makes sense that they would support the ultra-Catholics in this realm, because Charles V was basically spending his life trying to unify everyone under Catholicism. His son probably wouldn't be any different. As a matter of fact, we refer to King Philip II as the most Catholic king. I always call him that, and in that term, or in that voice too. So basically what happens is the Duke of Guise, Henry, is able to take over Paris, but he doesn't become king. He becomes chief minister. And so basically he's like the right-hand man by force of the king. Well, we'll see how that plays out. So basically what happens is King Henry of the Valois family goes ahead and has the Duke of Guise, Henry of Guise, assassinated and ends up teaming up with Henry Navarre. One of the things I forgot to mention previously is that one of the ways that Henry of Navarre was able to escape being murdered by the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre is that he converted to Catholicism to save his life. Well, as we talked about earlier with Captain Flip Flop, he flipped back over to being Calvinist, and so now he's leading the Huguenots again. So you have Henry of Valois teaming up with Henry of Navarre to take on the ultra Catholics. So you have the Protestant Calvinists and the Catholics that are headed by the king teaming up to take on the ultra Catholics, and they end up winning. But it doesn't work out so well for Henry of Valois because a monk basically gets super angry and assassinates the king. So now we only have one Henry left from the three Henrys, and that is Henry of Navarre, and he actually becomes the king of France. Okay, so let's think now. Isn't Henry of Navarre a Calvinist? He is, but he also knows that the French people will never settle down unless they have a French Catholic king. So he does what's best for the country. That's why I refer to him as a politique instead of focusing on religion. He converts back to Catholicism. And he goes ahead and makes some decisions that free up some of the tension between the two religious sides with the Edict of Nantes. Now that's going to actually be taken apart when he's a Bourbon. When we get to one of his grandchildren, King Louis XIV, he's going to throw the Edict of Nantes in the trash, but that's a lesson later down the road. So basically, man, it sounded like Mike Tyson right there. Basically, Catholicism is the religion of France, the official religion of France. The Huguenots, though, do get some freedoms here. They're allowed to worship in certain parts of every city, and Huguenots are allowed to keep their fortified towns, and Huguenots are also allowed to hold political offices. And this is going to basically end the whole religious conflict as far as France is concerned within it, though. There's still going to be more religious conflict. That's going to be in a later lesson. So hopefully you are able to kind of go through here and kind of understand what the issues were. We end up in this lesson overall having advancements as far as religious freedoms for people who are Calvinists. That's only in France. And we only have Lutherans gain equality well, I don't know if it would be called equality, but acceptance as far as the German states are going to be concerned. And both of those are going to be front and center in our next set of military conflicts that we'll cover in a future lesson. So that's going to wrap it up. Hopefully you did. Hopefully you got some useful knowledge out of this, and we'll see you for Lecture 5 pretty soon.